What we are about to examine is not merely war. It is the precondition of war, the invisible architecture that makes war not only possible but at times inevitable. Today, I will guide you through 4 interlocking dimensions: political psychology, collective psychology, religious narrative, and the psychology of war. Because if we fail to understand these, we will continue to misread conflicts as accidents of policy, when in reality they are outcomes of human perception. Most people believe war begins with weapons. It does not. War begins with a story. Before the first bullet is fired, a narrative is constructed. Before the first missile launches, emotion is mobilized. Before the first explosion, fear is organized. This leads us to a critical question. Why do nations sometimes escalate conflicts even when it appears irrational? Why do leaders choose catastrophe over compromise? And perhaps most disturbingly, why do populations endure suffering, yet continue to support the system that produces it? The answer does not lie in strategy alone. It lies in something deeper: fear, attachment, identity, and collective illusion. At this point, I want to introduce a text that may seem unexpected in the context of geopolitics: the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Contrary to popular belief, this is not merely a spiritual manual about death. It is a psychological map, a map of how human beings under extreme fear distort reality and then become trapped inside that distortion. And when we apply this framework to war, a profound insight emerges. War does not begin externally. War begins internally. Fear does not originate from the threat itself. It is constructed in the mind before the threat fully materializes. And once fear takes hold, it exaggerates the enemy, distorts reality, and drives decision-making toward extremes. The text offers a striking proposition. Fear is not reality, it is perception. Now consider what happens when this perception is shared collectively, when fear is no longer individual but systemic. At that point, we witness what can only be described as collective psychological acceleration. In systems like Iran, for example, religious narrative, martyrdom ideology, and regime survival logic converge. Individual fear becomes collective belief. Collective belief becomes moral justification, and justification becomes action, which leads to war. We can model this process structurally: fear, narrative, justification, action, war. Notice something important. This process is not about who is right or wrong. It is about who defines reality. Let us examine a controversial phenomenon through this lens. Why would a military power signal or warn before an attack? From a Western strategic perspective, particularly in U.S. doctrine, this is not weakness, it is controlled signaling. The objective is not total destruction, but calibrated pressure, maintaining legitimacy, minimizing civilian casualties, and preserving operational freedom. In this sense, warning is psychological warfare. It sends a message: we can strike anywhere. We choose restraint. But here is where the structure becomes dangerous, because the opposing side can reinterpret that signal. Groups such as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps may exploit this information. They may reposition civilians or even children into targeted zones. Now the battlefield transforms. No longer a military confrontation, but a moral theater. The image shifts from strike versus target to power versus innocence. And in that moment, the war changes domains from military conflict to moral conflict. This is not accidental. It is rooted in collective psychology. The introduction of children into conflict zones does 3 things. First, it reframes the war morally, triggering global emotional response. Second, it strengthens internal cohesion. Our children are part of this struggle. Third, it accelerates radicalization. At that stage, compromise becomes impossible. Retreat becomes unthinkable. The system locks itself into escalation. From a political psychology standpoint, this creates what we might call a mutual hostage structure. One side claims, "We warned." Responsibility is not ours. The other responds, "You attack." The moral burden is yours. Each side traps the other, not militarily, but ethically. Returning to the philosophical lens of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, we encounter a crucial idea. In moments of transition, humans mistake illusion for reality. Apply this to war. One side constructs a reality of precision and control. The other constructs a reality of sacrifice and martyrdom. Both are narratives. Both are selective, and both reinforce themselves. This leads us to a powerful analogy. War, in this context, resembles a collective bardo state, not a struggle between life and death, but between system survival and system collapse. In such a state, rationality weakens. Symbolism dominates. Narrative overrides reality. Now let us confront the final strategic question. Could the United States realistically launch a large-scale ground war in Iran? From a military standpoint, this would be extraordinarily difficult. Iran's geography, its scale, its layered defensive structure. These eliminate the possibility of rapid victory. Unlike previous conflicts such as the Iraq War, the terrain and resistance networks here would produce a prolonged, asymmetric conflict. Victory might be achievable, but conclusion would not be. From a political standpoint, the constraints are even tighter. After the war in Afghanistan, public tolerance for extended ground warfare is deeply eroded. The cost, financial, human, and political, would likely outweigh any strategic gain. And perhaps most critically, the objective itself is unclear. Regime change, containment, deterrence. Entering is easy, exiting is not. So we arrive at a sobering conclusion. War is not simply a matter of capability. It is a function of perception, fear, and narrative control. And when fear is mistaken for reality, destruction is no longer a choice. It becomes an outcome. Let me leave you with this. When a nation begins to act not on reality, but on the illusion of threat, it has already crossed the most dangerous threshold. Because at that point, war is no longer being decided. It is unfolding. If this perspective challenged the way you think about conflict, consider subscribing, sharing, and engaging with this channel. Because the goal here is not to react to war, but to understand the forces that make it inevitable. Thank you.